Hello and welcome to module 3 of the demo. And in this module, you will use AWS Lambda and Amazon DynamoDB to build a backend process for handling requests for your web application. The browser application that you deployed in the first module allows users to request that a unicorn to be sent to a location of their choice. So in order to fulfill those requests, the JavaScript running in the browser will need to invoke a service running in the cloud. You will implement a Lambda function that will be invoked each time a user requests a unicorn, and the function will select a unicorn from the fleet, record the request in a DynamoDB table, and then respond to the front-end application with details about the unicorn being dispatched. So the function is invoked from the browser using Amazon API Gateway, and you will implement that connection in the next module. So for this module, you'll just test your function in isolation. So in this module, we'll use the Amazon DynamoDB console to create a new DynamoDB table and call your table with some name like rides and give it a partition key called ride ID with type string. The table name and the partition key are case sensitive, so make sure you use the exact IDs provided, and you can use default setting or others. So let's just go to DynamoDB. So we are at DynamoDB almost, and now we will create a table by name rides. We will use ride ID for partition key, and the type will be string. Other settings we can keep as default, and we can click on create. One more thing here, we need to take a note of the ARN of this DynamoDB table. So it will be used somewhere in future. So we are making a note as of now. So keep a note of this and save it. So now we'll create a Lambda function, and actually IAM role for a Lambda function. So every Lambda function has an IAM role associated with it. This role defines what other AWS services the function is allowed to interact with. So for the purpose of this workshop, you'll need to create an IAM role that grants your Lambda function permission to write logs to Amazon CloudWatch and access to write items to your DynamoDB table. So use this IAM console to create a new role. So we'll go to IAM, it's there in my history. I'll go to roles and I'll select create a new role, and I'll select Lambda here. So there are two options, AEC to Lambda. So we'll select Lambda here because we are creating this role for Lambda functions to interact with CloudWatch and DynamoDB. Now we'll go to permissions. Now we'll search for basic execution role. So AWS Lambda basic execution role, and we'll go to next step. No need to give a tag as of now. We'll give some name to this Lambda function. So while writes Lambda is fine here. Okay, so we'll use some other name and we'll create this role. Now we have to add a inline policy for DynamoDB as well. So we'll select this role and we'll go to permission and we'll choose add inline policy. Now we need to choose a service, and the service for which we are looking for on inline policy is DynamoDB. So we'll select DynamoDB, and what kind of permissions access level we are looking for is, so we are looking for protection. So put item is the correct option. And then in resources section, we need to give the ARN of the DynamoDB table to restrict access, so that this lambda function role, will provide access to write to DynamoDB table. So I can give the full ARN here, and everything will be selected automatically. I'll just click on add, and I'll just choose review policy and give this policy some name, and we'll create this policy. Now since this policy is created, now the next step will be to create a lambda function. So we'll go to services and look for lambda. We'll click on create function. We'll select author from scratch. We'll give this some name, and for runtime environment we can use Node.js. So in the role section in permissions, we can use an existing role. Actually, we need to use an existing role because since we created it in the last action, so we'll select this role, the one we have created for writing to DynamoDB and CloudWatch, and then we will click on create function. So the lambda function is created. Now we'll go to the bottom of this lambda function, and in index.js we'll put some code for the lambda function. So this code will be provided to you, and we'll just replace it with this code. So this code will be used to write to DynamoDB for each of the write when somebody will request for the write. So now we'll save this lambda function, and now we need to test the lambda function and using a test function whether it is working fine or not. So we'll configure test events. We'll give some name, and again we need to give some code for configuring the test function. So we'll just configure this test event. Now select this test event and test this code. So we see the execution result has been succeeded. So that means this function is working properly as a standalone service. So if you see status code 201 body, this name, some random names, so everything is working fine. So that means our lambda function is working properly. So now in next module we'll deploy our RESTful API. After this